Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome. We're in November. How did that happen? Hi, Megan. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Just trying to keep my kids' Halloween candy out of sight and out of mind from them and me.
Sarah's done the same thing to me. I don't understand that, but she's hidden the candy somewhere. I'm going to find it, I promise. Anyway, we are glad to have all of you with us. Welcome. We hope that you had a good wrap up to October. We are now in the 4-month window to the February 2022 exams, and that means it's starting to get real for people, right?
Yeah, it is. I think once we start to get into this season, I'm seeing a lot of people really starting to buckle down with their studies, which is great. People getting into a routine. That's awesome. If that's not you yet, go for it. Just set a pace for yourself, figure out how much you need to be spending every week on it, and start going. You'll appreciate it when we hit December if you start now.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take some questions that came in during the week from people, and then we're going to pick up. You and I have we've gone into the depths here to find the 10 hardest MBE questions of all time. We're going to pick up, hopefully we get through 3 of them today. We picked some interesting questions, I think, don't you?
Definitely. There's some really interesting little twists and turns in these ones. So I can see why they were difficult, definitely difficult questions.
Yes. So stay with us. If you're with us live, you're going to get to participate. If you're watching, you still get to participate. We just don't know how you did. So why don't we go ahead and jump in, Megan? Why don't you bring us up to date on what's going on around the bar exam world?
Yeah, so results are still trickling in. We've had several states from since we met last. So Alaska came in at an 8% repeater pass rate. Rough. That's definitely one of the lowest we've seen, but certainly continuing the trend. Yeah. New York results were released this week, and we had a return to normal, which is a much lower score than the October 2020 exam. They had a 63% overall pass rate and an 18% repeater pass rate. So Jackson, you want to talk a little bit about why it is that we didn't stay at those high October levels?
Yeah, the obvious reason is that they changed the criteria for who was able to take the exam. If you weren't aware, in fall of 2021, the New York bar basically excluded anyone who had taken the bar more than twice and failed. And they also excluded a fair number of foreign bar takers and others. So essentially you had a first-time bar taker cohort in 2021. Then in February of 2021, they did the same thing. And then when we got into this last exam, this is so confusing to me, in July of 2021, then they went back and said anybody could take the exam. Well, suddenly you had a flood of people who were repeat bar takers who had been left out for a period of time, right? They were completely closed out of the exam. They came back and took the exam, and what we get then is a more normal, for this season, of repeater pass rates, and they had a huge number of repeaters. So the first-time bar taker rate was 78%, but the overall is 63%, which tells you how far down it came with that 18% repeater pass rate. And so the media has been talking about, the bar rates fell. Well, the bar rates fell because suddenly you allowed other people back into the exam, and I think it needs to be seen in that window.
Definitely. That's very interesting because the New York Board of Law Examiners has been blaming the change on how the test in October of 2020 was just slightly different than the normal test. And I find that to be a very interesting strategy from a PR perspective, certainly because it kind of raises the question of, well, if this test is supposed to be just minimum competence and you're suddenly saying that somehow both tests test minimum competence, but in this format of a test, this huge number of people were minimally competent, and in the normal way we give the test, the numbers are so much different. It raises the questions about the validity then, right, of the test.
I'm not sure that they thought that argument out, because ultimately that boxes them into that very problem. So I think they might be rethinking whether or not they really want to take that position here. I think ultimately in all these things, you want to be pretty skeptical and pretty observant of the overall information pattern. You don't want to take these numbers out of context, and that's the easy thing to do. It's the hot take from the media, but it's really not accurate.
Yeah. Yes. So New York continuing the trend of these really low repeater pass rates, certainly. Yeah. Tennessee results were released. They had a 20% repeater pass rate. And then DC and Louisiana also released results, and neither one has, as of yet, released a repeat pass rate.
Yeah. And in DC, what we've got is a 73% pass rate overall. I think given that number and what we've seen in other jurisdictions with similar pass rates, is we're probably looking at a bar taker rate of around 20%. I mean, it's just very consistent across the country. We've seen a few outliers, a handful that were higher in small jurisdictions where they might have had fewer bar takers. But in every major jurisdiction, Florida, Georgia, Texas, we've seen the same trend. It's 20% for repeaters. So if you're a repeat bar taker, we'll just say what we've been saying all along. It's a new world. You just cannot get through this exam at minimum effort, minimum competency, minimum study time. You've got to put in more, and you got to bring more tools to be able to be successful. That's why we continue to offer tools. If I can segue out for just 1 second, we've just added a brand new tool. It is a course called Resiliency, and it is a program put together by our partners at Learning Strategies. It is a look at how you bounce back from adversity. I went through it in some detail over the last couple of months in anticipation of the results coming out this year. And I think it's a wonderful series. There's 8 audio lessons. There's a 65-page PDF manual, and then there's 4 Paraliminal recordings that are just tremendous for helping you find the bounce back, the resilience that you need. And I think, and Megan, you can speak to this, I think people need to be resilient when they get their bar results. It's such a devastating blow. And so often they just give up, they quit, or they go half-heartedly into it. And what I loved about this resiliency program is that it really enhanced that sense of how you actually put this back together and do better in the future. So we've made a deal with Learning Strategies. You can purchase the course in a digital format. We'll be adding some things to it as we go along. I hope people will check that out. I think it will be a helpful tool. So
great. Yeah. All right. Next, let's chat about the UBE, the results, or not the results. Now that many of the results have been released, UBE has released their topics for the essays. Yeah. So we've known them for a while, but now we actually get to talk about them. So I'm just going to go through them really quick, and then Jackson, you can touch on whatever you want to discuss with everyone. So the first essay was torts. Then there was corporations and LLCs and conflict of laws.
Yeah, and let me just stop you there just to say that was the only crossover in the exam. And conflicts of law is not typically, it's only a crossover topic. It doesn't get tested very often. I would have expected this to be a harder question for people. It was not. The overall national scoring was pretty consistent here. It was not a bad topic for people.
Third was a difficult topic for people. Family law. That surprised me, at least, that this was the hands down tough essay on the UBE.
Yeah. Isn't that strange that it would be the hard one, the one that caused people the most difficulty? But nationally, it was the lowest score. And I thought that was fascinating, not in a good way. It made me wonder, why would people have so much difficulty? And I suspect part of the reason is that we tend to think of family law as a state-specific subject. And when you get into these sort of larger 30,000-foot views of the subject, sometimes it confuses people. The other reason I suspect is that people just didn't take the subject all that seriously when they were studying it nationally. It's like, family law, how tough can that be? But as it turned out, it was pretty tough. So there you go. That was the killer question. Weird.
The fourth essay was Crim Law and Procedure. Mm-hmm. Then there was Decedents Estates, and then Civil Procedure.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying I was pretty accurate. Not just saying. We had, if you look at it, torts, crim, and civ pro, we had 3 multi-state subjects, 4 non-multi-state subjects, only 1 crossover. I thought it was a pretty fair exam, and I thought that the balance of the exam was pretty good there. For those who are keeping score, I did think that crim was going to be on the exam. I gave that a pretty high probability. I gave torts a very high probability, and family law I gave a high probability, antecedents of states. So there you go. I just looking back, and corporations, man, I pretty much nailed it. So now that I'm looking at it, I nailed it. And we are putting those questions and the draft report sheets in our books. We'll have those out soon, so people can check that out as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then the 2 performance tests.
The first performance test nationally scored higher than the second. So as you're looking at your scores, if you were a UBE bar taker and your score on the second UBE was lower than the first, that was the norm.
All right, let's get to some student questions before we talk about our MBE questions. A couple of questions about things lining up. So first is, do the lectures line up directly with the outlines?
Yeah, for the most part, when I'm lecturing, I lecture in a corresponding way to the outline, but not always 100%. And so I wanted to just point this out. We had a student that was struggling trying to find the 11th Amendment in con law. And the answer to that, because I didn't like in that particular, in the con law lecture, I do jump around a little bit because I'm trying to take all these disparate ideas and put them together. The answer is really simple. And because you've got PDFs, open up the PDF and do Control F, or I don't know what it is on a Windows machine, but on a Mac, it's Control F or Command F. And that will give you a search button, and just type in 11th Amendment, and it'll take you right to the 11th Amendment in the outline, and you can see a couple pages right there. It's not all that complicated when you do the search function. Now, if you're trying to go through the table of contents, I think that's a lot to try and figure out where something might be. So just use that electronic digital search function. And remember, you get to stop the lecture and find the section. So if I say, now I'm going to talk about the 11th Amendment, stop the lecture, jump into your outline and find it. Or even better, don't look in the outline at that point. Just listen to the lecture, take your notes or your mind map, and then go back and pick it up in the outline later. So a couple different ways to study, but I think it would be really boring, don't you, if I just went through section by section of the outline, and I get bored and then the students get bored. And I know when you lecture, you're pretty good about staying close to the outline, but you don't follow it exactly either. So there you go.
Yeah, we want to make sure these are 2 discrete tools. So the outlines and the lectures, I actually would not use them at the same time. I think you should read the outline and then you should go into the lecture. And when you're in the lecture, if you want to take notes or anything like that, but I don't think that following along the outline is actually the best way to do it, because there's 2 different things, right? If we were just going to read you the outline, we'd read you the outline. What a waste of your time. So yeah, so I think I would do that. Okay. Question. Someone who's just trying to get started with the photo reading, how do they begin?
Yeah, really the way you start is you get into the photo reading course in your online platform, and there are 8 one-hour lessons, and you just go through those lessons. And then you will see in your regular course, we want you to go ahead and begin your studies. We don't want you to wait for photo reading to finish before you start your regular studies, now that we're in this 4-month window. So go ahead and start your regular studies, and you'll come up alongside it with photo reading very quickly. If you're doing 1 photo reading lesson a day, which is our recommendation, so an hour a day for 8 days, you're only talking about those 8 or 9 days to be fully conversant in photo reading, and then you'll just lock that right into your studies. So don't make it complicated, simple step by step, and you'll be fine.
Yes. All right. Next question is, am I able to access MBE questions in a testing app or only in PDF form?
You can do it in both. In the course, you'll see PDFs, and you can download those. The questions are right there along with the answer explanations. There's also a link to our online app, and the online app allows you to do the questions on any device connected to the internet, and you'll get an instant feedback as you do each question. So you can do it either way.
Great. May I download the review to my work as well as my home computer, or does it only download to one computer?
No, you can anything that's downloadable can be downloaded as many times as you want to any device. Obviously, it's tough to download big files to your phone or maybe to your tablet. The lectures are never downloadable. They're all protected, and they're huge files. They're multiple gigabytes each, so you wouldn't want to do that anyway. But you can download the PDFs, and that's available from any site as often as you want, wherever you want. Just don't share them with anybody because they are copyrighted, and it's not our copyright. It's the National Conference's copyright. So tread lightly there, folks. That could get you in a world of hurt if you break that copyright. So there you go.
All right. All right. We just have a couple study strategies questions, and then we'll get to the MBE. Someone said, I was reviewing a video again for the February bar exam. Do you suggest I follow the course guide again as it is presented? I'm just trying to get my mind focused on my study schedule. So this is a retaker.
Yeah, I think for a repeat bar taker, it's good to make sure you hit all of the spots. Some people would like to rearrange the subjects, maybe based on their scores or based on their comfort level. And I don't really have a problem with that. It's easy to see all of them in this new course platform. You can see every subject, every assignment. Just make sure you're keeping track so you don't miss anything. And that would be for a repeater. Now, if you're first time in our course, we want you to go through the course the way it's laid out, because there is a progression to the writing, to the difficulty level of the questions, and so on. First time in our course, even if you're a repeat bar taker, follow it through the way you see it. Go next lesson, next lesson. If you are repeating the course, I think you can feel free to jump around. I would also say if you're repeating the course, take a look at some of those optional assignments. Those may be things you didn't do previously. They go in a little more depth and might help you get a little more expertise. So don't be afraid to jump into those as well.
Great. A great question in the chat box is, doing the multiple choice exercises like going to the gym, some days you do better than others?
Yeah, it is great. Some days you do better than others. And also, I'll tell you that the questions get harder as you go. I mean, we designed it that way. Somebody asked me that today. I was like, yeah, it's like the frog in water. We try to turn up the temperature gently and you don't know you're boiling. But yeah, you're going to have better and worse days, don't you think, Megan?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And just like if you were training for a marathon or any kind of big goal that you've got, you don't judge the end result based on a hard day, right? So that's okay. You keep moving. That's the key with it. Don't get discouraged if you have a difficult day with your MBE questions or with an essay. That's not, as long as it's not test day, you're fine. You're going to learn from it and move forward. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And last question is, I was wondering if it might be a worthwhile strategy to slip in a UBE essay topic in between every one of the major 7 MBE topics. Do the practice essay on that UBE essay topic so as not to leave the UBE essay topics clumped at the end.
Yeah, this is what we talked about before. If you're repeating in our course, I think you can move those things around in whatever way makes sense to you. Again, if you're first time in our course, don't do that. Just follow through because we've got a logic to it. But yeah, I think that's fine.
Great. All right, let's move on to, what is this, number 8 on our top 10 countdown here of hardest MBE questions?
So we are talking about the 10 hardest MBE questions ever. This is part 2. And maybe you feel like our students sitting there like, oh my God, how could this be? We're going to try and show you how to deal with some difficult questions. Today, we're going to start with a property question. And you can tell I'm excited about that always. So here's question number 8 on our countdown. We did 2 last week in civil procedure, but we're going to start today with question number 8. And what I'm going to do is read the question first, and then we're going to break it down. Megan's going to help me break it down. And we're going to invite all of you who are with us live or watching later in replay to figure out the answer yourself. So let's see how you do. So here's our question. Under the terms of his duly probated will, a testator devised his house to his, quote, grandchildren in fee simple, and the residue of his estate to his brother. The testator had 2 children, a son and a daughter, but only the daughter survived the testator. At the time of the testator's death, the daughter was 30 years old and had 2 minor children, these were grandchildren of the testator, who also survived the testator. A third grandchild of the testator, who was the child of the testator's predeceased son, aren't you wish you were reading this now instead of listening, had been alive when the testator executed the will, but had predeceased the testator. Under the applicable intestate succession laws, the deceased grandchild's sole heir was his mother. All right, next paragraph, as if that wasn't enough. A statute of the jurisdiction provides as follows, and I'm quoting now. If a devisee, including a devisee of a class gift, who is a grandparent or a lineal descendant of a grandparent of the testator, is dead at the time of the execution of the will, or fails to survive the testator, the issue of such deceased devisee shall take the deceased share under the will, unless the will expressly provides that this statute shall not apply. For the purpose of this, the words of survivorship, such as, if he survives me, are a sufficient expression that the statute shall not apply. Close quote. And now we get to the call of the question, who now owns the house? Oh, Megan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that I understand why people struggle with this one. This is a just morass of really tricky, complicated language that's really saying some simple things, but in really complicated ways.
It really is. And so here's one of the first things that we're going to suggest to you. You see in this second paragraph, we've got this long statute. I would suggest that as we move forward, you ignore that statute entirely for the first level of your analysis and see if you need it or not. Because typically, when the examiners give you something like this, it's important, but it's not as important as you think it's going to be. In other words, it feels like it must be critical in this question, but maybe it's not so critical. So let's see what happens. And remember, our process using selective intuition is to start by not looking at the answer choices, but instead to ask ourselves a more basic question. And that is, let's try to answer this or preview an answer before we get to the answer choices. So here's how I would have previewed this. The question was, who owns the house? And I think you want to answer that before you look at the specific answer choices. Now, as I thought about who owns the house, I just tried to make up some possibilities, right? So my first possibility was, well, maybe the brother owns the house, or maybe the surviving grandkids own the house, or maybe all of the grandchildren, not just the surviving ones, do it. And then I was lost and I said, well, maybe there's some other combination. Maybe the examiners are going to come up with something else that's weird. Does that make sense, Megan, as a starting strategy when you're starting to think about this before you ever look at the answer choices?
Yeah, exactly. I think you want to break it down into a simpler component part, which is just, even if you have no idea why, just try and think, okay, who does my gut tell me this house is going to go to?
Right. So before we go on, I'm going to ask those of you in the chat box, tell us, do you think it's brother, surviving grandkids, all the grandchildren, or some other combination?
We move back to the questions.
The testator devised his house to his grandchildren in fee simple and the residue of the estate to the brother. The testator had two children, a son and a daughter, but only the daughter survives the testator. At the time of his death, the daughter is 30 years old and had two minor children, so those would have been the grandchildren, and they survived the testator. The third grandchild of the testator, who was the child of the testator's predeceased son, had been alive when the will was executed, but had predeceased the testator. And under the applicable intestate succession laws, the deceased grandchild's sole heir was his mother. Now, I'm not going to repeat the statute because I think that'll just confuse you. So hopefully that helps, right? Yeah. Are we getting some answers in the chat box?
I mean, just one.
Just take a guess. Put it in there. Be brave. I want you to do it because there's an important rule here, which is that if you just take what you heard and you trust yourself, and I know a lot of you are terrified that you didn't know it in detail enough that you could write the answer. Don't do that. Just listen to what I've told you and make a choice between those four things, okay? And what difference does it make if you're right or wrong? We're not going to call anybody out, I promise, okay? So we're not getting to the because or the reasons. We're just asking ourselves, who owns the house? What does your gut tell you should be happening?
All right. We got
a few.
Yeah, we've got a few. Mm-hmm.
All right. So now let's look at our answer choices and see what the examiner said. One choice was very simple, just straight up, the testator's brother. So one of our options was just exactly what it was there. The other was the testator's two surviving grandchildren. Okay, nope, not complicated so far. How about the testator's two surviving grandchildren and all other grandchildren who were born to the testator's daughter? Okay, well, we didn't offer that option exactly, but we did have a particular possibility. And then D is the testator's two surviving grandchildren and the deceased grandchild's mother. All right. Now, having thought about it and preformed your answer, now look at these choices and pick A, B, C, or D. Now, this should be easier for people to do, don't you think?
Yeah, hopefully. I think this is a really tricky. I just think this is a really tricky one. I just want to tell people, don't panic if you're like, I have no idea. This is a really hard question. So,
MBE question of all time, for gosh.
I think it's interesting. I'm seeing, I don't think anybody said the brother, so I shouldn't see any A's, right? I think some people who thought that it would be all the grandchildren, right? That might be maybe then D, because you're thinking the 2 surviving grandchildren plus the deceased mother. So that would be, it went to all of the, if you said the surviving grandchildren, obviously that would be B. So we've got a lot of different letters here. So
okay, a lot of possibilities. All right, well, let's take a look here. So when you're looking for this, you've pre-formed your answer. Now you look at the answer choices, and I put on our thermometer 75% because I think what you're looking for here, you've got some fairly distinct choices. It's not a binary 50-50 choice. And that makes it trickier, don't you think, when you've got that kind of open-ended question? And it gets tougher. And so you got to really try to narrow it down and say, what's the closest match out of those 4 choices to what I had in mind? And I think that's what you're describing for us from the chat box. So that's what we're looking for. All right, let's see what we got here. The correct answer is going to be the testator's 2 surviving grandchildren. So let me explain a little bit about why that's the case. The reason here is that the testator devised the house, which he owned at death, to the grandchildren, and that was a class gift. Now, as a class gift, it means that it goes to everyone in that class, and this was the grandchildren. So the testator survived by 2 grandchildren. They're the only surviving members of the class. So we know that they're going to get it. What about the deceased grandchild's interest? And that's where it gets more difficult. It lapses because the grandchild, remember, was alive when the will was executed. That grandchild died before the testator. So now we've got a lapse. The deceased grandchild, however, doesn't qualify under the anti-lapse statute. And that's where we have to go back to the actual wording of that statute. And we might have to look at it in detail, except that the anti-lapse statute isn't really going to come into play with all the answer choices, is it? Right?
Right. So the key with the anti-lapse statute here is that the grandchild didn't have any children. There was no issue. And so that's the key there, is that it would have gone to deceased grandchild's mother, which is not allowed under that.
That's right. So the point I want to make here is that you could spend a long time in reading the question under that anti-lapse statute, and it doesn't pay you much of a dividend, does it?
Right. Yeah. You really just want to try and get a general sense of what it's saying. Try and cut through the language. I know it's really hard. Try and cut through the language and see it basically says, hey, if they have kids, then we're good. Like it would go to the kid. Yeah. But if not, then they're out. They're not part of it anymore.
Exactly. So let's look at answer choices A, C, and D, because I think we can group those together. That's why I said it's a 75-25. It's really, you're either locked into that answer, or I think you're going to wind up in one of these other choices. And the point here is the house is going to pass to the 2 surviving grandchildren because they survived as members of the class. It will not go into the residue. So we don't need to worry about any of that. So that eliminates the brother and some of the other choices. The deceased grandchild's interest lapsed because they died before the testator, and the deceased grandchild would qualify under the statute, but because they didn't have any children, then they can't be substituted under the statute. And that's really what eliminates the choice of C and D. And so in a real sense, as difficult as this question is, and people miss it, I think, because of the anti-lapse statute, in reality, it's not that difficult if you parse away all the other stuff that you didn't need.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Yeah.
How do we do? Anybody get B as an answer?
Yeah,
choice?
A couple people did, including, I have to say, one person who said they took a random shot at it because they were so lost. And I love when that happens. That's pure intuition, right? Is like, I just have no idea, but this one feels the most right to me.
It does feel the most right. And it's the simplest answer. You don't need all the other stuff. So I'm glad that nobody selected A. That would have been I think the distinctly wrong answer. I can understand why C and D would cause problems, but I think if you answered C or D, it was because you're overthinking it. You're trying to get too much out of the question, and certainly out of that anti-elapse statute. It's a tough question, to be sure, but that's what we're working on. And so give yourself a big pat on the back if you answered B. And if you didn't answer A, then that's a good pat on the back. And if you got C and D, now you know why. So are people like falling on their swords on the chat box, Megan?
No.
All right. We're going to move on, and we're going to go to a contracts question. And this next question, I think, shouldn't be as difficult as it was, but it's got a 24% success rate. So let's see how you do with this one, guys, and see if it makes you as crazy as the property question. Here we go. Question number 7 on our list of the top 10 MBE questions, hardest MBE questions of all time. Elda, the aged mother of Alice and Barry, both adults, wished to employ a live-in companion so that she might continue to live in her own home. Elda, however, had only enough income to pay 1/2 of the companion's $2,000 a month salary. Learning of their mother's plight, Alice and Barry agreed with each other in a signed writing that on the last day of January in each succeeding month during their mother's lifetime, each would give Elda $500. Elda then hired the companion. Alice and Barry made the agreed payments in January, February, and March. In April, however, Barry refused to make any payment and notified Alice and Elda that he would make no further payments. Assume that there is a valid contract between Alice and Barry and that Elda has declined to sue Barry. Will Alice succeed in an action against Barry in which she asks the court to order Barry to continue to make his payments to Elda under the terms of the Alice and Barry contract? Well, what particular problem does this present as you're reading?
It's basically is Alice going to win, right? Is Barry going to have to, can she make him pay Elda?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to look at that last paragraph and recognize that Elda isn't going to sue. And so this is an action of Alice against Barry, and she's asking Barry to make his payments. So I think you can get, again, confused by thinking, well, does Elda have a cause of action? That's not what they're asking for. And I think people get sucked into that kind of a problem. So again, to use our idea of previewing an answer, this is a binary question. And so the question is, will Alice win in her lawsuit? And the answer is yes, because, or no, because. So now what I want you to do before we look at the answer choices, if you're playing along with us at home, type in yes or no. And if you want to give us a because reason, you get extra points. We'll see what people do here. But I like these yes or no kinds of questions, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, you've got right off the gate, right out of the gate, that you've got 50-50. You're going to probably see, in most cases, 2 yeses because and 2 no because.
Yeah, and in this particular case, what you're going to discover is that's actually the language, yes because and no because. And so this is the classic form of a question, and you should just, your eyes should light up, even when it's a tough question, if it's a yes, no, because it does narrow it down and you don't have to be as complicated. So are we getting yeses and nos in the chat box?
Yes, and we're getting both of them.
We're getting both of them. Okay, this is why it's a tough question. All right, so now let's look at the answer choices the examiners provide. Answer choice A is yes, because Alice's remedy at law is inadequate. B, yes, because Alice's burden of supporting her mother will be increased if Barry does not contribute his share. So if you're one of the yeses, you want to look at A or B here, right?
Yeah.
And now we've got a no, because a court will not grant specific performance of a promise to pay money. And I'm guessing this will be a no. It is. No, because Barry's breach of contract has caused no economic harm to Alice. So again, we see 2 yes answers, 2 no answers. So if you selected yes, look at A or B. If you selected no, look at C or D, and take the answer choice that most closely matches your perceived idea and type that letter in, A, B, C, or D. And do it quickly. Don't take too long at this. You've got a reason in your mind. What is that reason? We're getting some of those in the chat box, Megan? Come on, guys. You can do it. You can do it. I want to push you because I don't want you to think too much. I think this is where people get into trouble. And what we're going to see here is people are going to miss this question because they think too hard. Don't you agree?
Yeah. And also, I think this is a very hard one. So I want to say we're definitely not expecting it to be like
these are
a
not
whole
the
bunch of
gimmies.
people get the right answer.
Yeah, these are not gimmies. I don't want to mislead anybody. Okay. We picked the 10 hardest of all time. All right. Okay. All right. Well, now you've got an A, B, C, or D choice. We got some in the box. Okay.
Yep, we do. I'm seeing lots of different letters here. B seems to be maybe the most common.
All right. Well, let's see what we got here. Again, what we want to do in that situation, we had the yes or no. Let's see. Come on. I don't know why it suddenly decided to go backwards on me. There we go. Okay. So in a yes or no, I'm just looking for 50%. What out of those two choices, yes or no, which one is mine? So I've now got a 50% chance of being right if my conclusion is right. Now, if I got the wrong conclusion, I'm toast. There's no question about that. All right. Here's our answer. A. Did anybody answer A, Megan?
Yeah, a few people, maybe only two. I think Gregory and Josh hedged his bets. It said A.
No, you don't get to do that, man. Come on. It's a Scantron. You got to mark one in. All right. Let's talk about why A is correct.
Oh, wait. And I want to point something out because this is really interesting. Josh said A or C, but Josh had said that the answer was yes. And so if Josh had stuck to the courage of his convictions, he would have gotten A, which was the yes, because C was a no answer. So he would have gotten
Josh,
right.
You have been immortalized.
It's a good illustration. It's a really good illustration of what we're trying to teach here.
Yeah. I don't want to say anything, Josh, but we've got 1.5 million views of these videos. So you're a famous dude. All right. Answer A is correct. Alice was a party to the original contract, so she has the right to sue in the event that the other party breaches. The obligation of Barry under the contract was to pay money to Elda. But because of that, Alice is not entitled to damages, but she is entitled to see that Barry does what he's supposed to do. He pays Elda the other $500 as long as she pays her share. Since there's no remedy at law for damages that would accomplish this, she's entitled to equitable relief. And equitable relief in this case would be an order to Barry to make the payment to Elda. So is she going to win? Yes. The remedy at law is simply inadequate. And that's the best of the answer choices. Now, it's not a great answer choice, is it? It's kind of, it's just out there, right?
Yeah, I hate these kind of MBE questions where it's basically because there's no other great choice, this one will do, sure, fine. It's very annoying, but you have to be aware of them and ready for them.
But here's the real key. If you said yes, which is what you should have intuitively felt, I think, the only two yes choices, you're not going to love answer choice B. It doesn't get you anything at all. B gets the correct result and it gives the motive, but it doesn't answer the question based on a legal doctrine. I mean, Alice's burden of supporting her mother will be increased. What? I mean, that's probably true, but in a third-party beneficiary contract, that has nothing to do with it. So B is a lousy explanation, even though it's the right conclusion. So I think that the success on this question is totally at the first level. If you get in and you read the 4 answer choices, you're going to be lost. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. They say, I didn't love B, but maybe the yes answer isn't the right answer. And now I got to jump over to the no answer. And we'll see why the no answers don't work. But really, if you just looked at the problem, I think most of you should have thought that Alice would succeed against Barry. If I just asked you, is she going to be successful against Barry? They had a written valid contract and he's in breach. Your first reaction would be, of course she's going to win. And then they give you these sort of ridiculous answer choices. I think the best one you've got is A, and B doesn't work at all. So that's the way I picture it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. And we had a lot of answer choice Bs. So people who said yes, and then probably, I'm assuming, were faced with these two options and said, oh my goodness, I really have no idea. So I think, it's really looking at it. A lot of times, I know you guys know this on the MBE, you're picking the best of bad options. So I know that
answer choice A is just not written well. It's it's really on the examiners. It's not on you, but it's your best choice. Let's look at the no answers for just a minute. If you answered C, that's incorrect. And the reason is that an action for damages is an adequate remedy for a contract in which you're paying money. But when the contract is to pay money to a third party, damages remedy is going to be inadequate. Specific performance isn't the appropriate remedy. Remember, C said that a court will not grant specific performance of a promise to pay money. So here we've got, is Alice going to prevail in the action? No, that's the wrong result. And it doesn't matter that the court wouldn't grant specific performance, it's just the wrong result. Okay, so that's where you get hung up. And I know a lot of people will pick C, but because the result is wrong, it can't be the correct answer. And the same thing essentially is true with answer choice D. D said no, because Barry's breach of contract caused no economic harm to Alice. Economic harm isn't the test of the ability to bring suit. There was an agreement. She had bargain for consideration. The payments were made in exchange for Alice making her payments, and therefore she has the right to sue for breach of contract. I think that's a clearer miss. And I would say if you answered choice D, you've really missed the point of what was going on. I could see a lot of people answering C. I think C would be a tempting answer to people, but it's got the wrong conclusion. And there you go, right? When you get to the wrong conclusion. Loving it. This is why these are the toughest. So I hope that gives people some idea of what's going on.
One more.
This is number 6 on our list. Sally told Michael she'd like to have sexual intercourse with him and that he should come to her apartment that night at 7 p.m. After Michael arrived, he and Sally went into the bedroom. As Michael started to remove Sally's blouse, Sally said she'd changed her mind. Michael tried to convince her to have intercourse with him, but after 10 minutes of her sustained refusals, Michael left the apartment. Unknown to Michael, Sally was 15 years old. Because she appeared to be older, Michael believed her to be about 18 years old. A statute in the jurisdiction provides, quote, a person commits rape in the second degree if he has sexual intercourse with a girl, not his wife, who is under the age of 16 years, close quote. If Michael is charged with attempting to violate the statute, he is. And that's where the question ends up before we get to the answer choices. Now, a couple things I want to say about this. One is this could trigger you. This could be an emotional question. And the second thing I would say is that in this era, this question is actually 30 years old. The first thing most people would jump at was the consent question, but that would be a mistake, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yeah. This is one where you have to remove any personal feelings that you might have from the question and just focus on what specifically they're asking you, which I get can be a difficult thing to do.
It can definitely be difficult. And I think a lot of people miss this question because they're so fixated on consent that they don't quite see the rest of the question. Now, remember what they're asking is he going to be guilty or not guilty? And so that's the yes or no that we've got now. Is Michael guilty of attempted statutory rape? That's the crime he's going to be charged with. So what I want you to do now in the chat box is type yes, he's guilty, or no, he's not guilty. And remember, the crime is attempted statutory rape because he does not actually commit, they don't have intercourse. And I think it's important to keep that in mind and to keep in mind how you want to deal with the consent question here and whether or not it really impacts the actual question, right? And if people want to put in the because reasons, they get extra credit, right? We get some answers there?
No answers yet, no.
All right. So remember, the problem here is Michael and Sally go into the bedroom. Michael starts to remove her blouse. She says she changes her mind. He tries to convince her to have intercourse. She says no. He leaves the apartment. He doesn't know it, but Sally's 15 years old, and he believes her to be about 18 years old. And the statute says a person commits rape in the second degree if they have sexual intercourse with someone under the age of 16 years. So is Michael guilty of statutory rape?
Lots of not guilty of attempted statutory rape.
Not guilty. Okay. All right. Let's see what we've got here. So let's look at the answer choices the examiners give us. A says guilty because no mental state is required as to the element of age. B says guilty because he persisted after she told him she had changed her mind. So if you answered guilty, you've got to choose between A and B. C says not guilty because he reasonably believed she had consented and voluntarily withdrew after she told him she changed her mind. And D says not guilty because he did not intend to have intercourse with a girl under the age of 16. So again, if you chose not guilty, you look at C or D and make your choice. If you chose guilty, you look at A or B and make your choice. And just to be clear, I'm okay with people in all of these binary choices. If you miss it because you have the wrong initial conclusion, that's something we want to correct as we're studying, but it's better than going down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out some of yes and some no's, right? Stay with it and narrow your answer choices down. Okay,
All
Megan,
right,
we get
so
some A, B, C's, and
we've
D's
got a
here?
lot of not guilty, but then I haven't seen answers yet. I've seen A's, which are, so the guilty people are speaking up. So not guilty people, what do you think it is?
We need you to jump in here. All right. Remember what we told you? We kind of gave this one away, but all right, let's go on, Megan. Let's see what happens here. And again, we're looking for 51%. You're in the 50-50 range. Which one is more likely matching to your result and your reasonings? And this is one of the reasons that I think it's important to get the reasoning, because you can struggle a bit. All right, we ready to look at the answer?
Yeah.
Answer A is incorrect. I know we had a lot of A's out there.
Yeah, a lot of A's.
Yeah. No mental state is required as to the element of age for a completed crime. But it is required for the crime of attempted statutory rape. There's a different mental state standard for a completed crime versus an attempt. Now, some of you haven't studied criminal law, and if you missed it for that reason, okay, I get it. But let's be clear that what they're doing here is that they're testing a fairly fine line distinction. If you thought that he was not guilty, or that he was guilty, and you thought that it's because there's no mental state, then I think you want to be clear about why you thought that. And that would have been for a completed crime. If you lost sight of the fact that he doesn't complete the crime, and this is asking about attempted statutory rape, that's the misreading of the question, right?
Yes. What's really interesting to me about this question is I would only expect to see either people picking A or picking D, because they are opposites, right? They're saying the exact same thing, but they can't both, but the opposite, they can't both be true. So I think if you thought he was guilty, it should have been A. If you thought he was not guilty, it should have been D.
Absolutely. All right. So let's look at B very quickly. It is incorrect. B said, because he persisted after she told him she changed her mind. Remember, he only intended to have intercourse with a woman over the age of 16. And this is not about consent. And therefore, he's not guilty of attempted statutory rape because he didn't intend to have intercourse with a female under 16. So that's the reason. And if you chose B, I'm afraid what happened is you probably went down the consent rabbit hole. And that's what makes it feel like it might be the correct answer. Although I can't imagine actually anybody choosing B.
Nobody chose B. Yeah,
okay, good. All right. Answer C, though, might have gotten you. Answer C is incorrect because consent isn't an issue in statutory rape. It's a strict liability crime. So if Michael had intercourse with Sally, he would have been guilty of statutory rape, even if she consented and even if he thought she was 18 years old. So statutory rape, no question about that. But because we don't have the rape, that's how C gets out of the picture, right? So if you chose C, it's because you were thinking about statutory rape instead of attempt. And then that leads us to D. Michael only intended to have intercourse with a woman over the age of 16. And so in order to be guilty of the crime of attempt, he has to intend to commit the crime that's attempted. He didn't do that because he didn't intend to have intercourse with a female under the age of 16. So there's no requisite intent because of a mistake of fact about Sally's age. Whew. We got any D's in there? Anybody choose answer D?
Yeah, we got a few D's. And I think Marie even called it before she even saw the questions. She wrote down, she wrote not guilty because attempt requires intent. So good job. You get the gold star for that one.
That's it. That was the sixth hardest MBE question of all time. Less at 24% of people that have taken that question in 30 years have gotten it right. That's all.
I do want to point out something really quick from the chat box that we're talking about. So people had some questions with the last one. And I think it also, you see it in the third one. So talking about the Alice and the valid contract. So there was a lot of, which I understand, we do these things in our head. But I didn't realize that it would be consideration for them to pay for someone else for their mom. it tells you there's a valid contract, period. There is a valid contract. Don't read into the facts, things that are either not said or never erase what's actually said because you think that there's some trick that, oh, but I know they said it's valid, but maybe it's not really. If they tell you something that is true for the purposes of this question, no matter what else, just in the world of this one question, that's true. It's a valid contract, period. So I think that's a really common thing that happens. It happens on essays as well. I just want to point that out. And I'm glad that it came up so that we can talk about it.
I hope this is helpful. We're trying to show you some trends and some strategies here. I hope what you really pull out of this is the importance of previewing the answer before you get there. It just makes the world so much simpler, gives you a better chance. You're not going to get them all right. These are the tough questions. But if you got some of these tough questions right, or you even got it narrowed down to 50%, look, I'd take 50% all day long, right? If you can get 50% chance, you're going to hit enough of these to pass the bar. So this is really what we're trying to explain. And of course, along the way, a little bit of substantive law. So you learned a little bit about several different areas of law today, and I hope that's helpful. Next week, we're going to come back. We're going to hit another 2 or 3 of those questions. Oh my gosh. We're actually getting close to some questions where less than 10% of the people got them right. So
I'm really proud of the brave people who took a shot and tried it. Great job, everybody, because that's not easy to do. So
right. And if you're watching on replay, don't be shy. We're not going to be able to call you out. You won't be famous like Josh, but give it a shot. See how you do. You'll learn more by doing it that way, I can promise you, than by just watching passively. So thanks, everybody, for being with us. We've got a busy week coming up. We should be getting a few more results in. We're still waiting on California. We've got, I think, another week before those results come out.
Yeah, I think it's the 12th. So
So it'll be here. And for those of you waiting in some of those UBE jurisdictions, hopefully this week, those results will be out as well. Thank you, Megan, for being with me. Appreciate it. Glad to have all of you here live with us. And we will see you next week. Have a good week of study. Thanks so much for being here. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.